All right, hello and welcome to a design episode on a particular game of mine called Adventure Hour. This is a game that I built while in the midst of running a lot of games for youngsters, particularly ages 8 to 12. And there was a few posts that I was writing at the time that largely inspired the design of this. So I wanted to talk through really some of the contents on here and what some of my design thoughts were when constructing this game back in 2021. So we're coming up on a 5-year anniversary of a game that I built with sweat, tears, and my hands. So I have the preview open, which is from the itch page. It's the first 8 pages. And then I'll also dive into the contents behind actually purchasing the game. But I wanted to talk through everything and if you've never heard of this game, give you kind of a preview sense of what's going on here. And then for those who do know the game and have played, you can get a little bit of my thoughts on behind why I did what I did and some additional insights. So let's get into it. The preview, the first 8 pages has a welcome, and reading through this again, I still hold to everything in here. So this is a game of creativity, exploration, and wonder. Great to have you on board. This game is intended for all audiences from ages 3 to 300 and designed with kids in mind. That said, the advice that applies to younger players often applies to adult players. Rather than label this game specifically as a game for kids, this game takes its players seriously by speaking plainly and without any references to age or maturity. This game has been tested with a wide range of folks, but mostly with kids aged 8 to 12. Do not let this deter any younger or older players from enjoying its contents. Stay young at heart and let your imagination soar, and happy gaming. As a dedication and a special thanks. And then a picture of a rocket ship. So all of these pictures I did by hand when I was just doodling at my desk between assignments I was doing in college, especially. I just took a black marker and would write, doodle out whatever I was thinking about at the time, sometimes using tables of maze rats as inspiration for the exact contents, and then would basically super contrast it and make it black and white. And then you get your pretty stark minimalist drawings. So if you're looking at the cover, you got the picture of this diamond-headed character and a square-headed character, both seemingly wearing helmets around a campfire. So that was kind of the stock adventure kind of gathering that I wanted to capture and display. I will also say, just as critique of myself, the title Adventure Hour emblazoned on the cover page is really boring. I think it's just Allegra, and then just put with a little exclamation point in there. That could definitely use sprucing up. All right. After the dedication, it gets into some touchstones. So I just wanted to list all the activities I was doing as a kid, all the books I've read related to just adventuring as a young person. TV shows and movies, I would like to highlight Harmon Quest as one that I was watching, especially at this time. A show that was doing, I think it's Pathfinder or some version of D&D. Pretty sure it's Pathfinder, that was being played with Dan Harmon and a bunch of his celebrity guest friends as they were doing, random adventure stuff with some animation to help assist what's going on in the theater of their mind. And it's something I thought really captured the spirit of the sit around with your friends and just have a good adventure time. And it did it quite well, but I wanted to capture that without having to roll hit dice or capture or have spell slots or levels or anything like that, because they were just, seemingly telling a story and reacting to all the different things that were happening in the world without so much regard for the mechanics. And I actually think that the game master handled all of the mechanics, so the players are doing things very theater of the mind by not even having, I think they may have had a character sheet in front of them, but they weren't tracking anything. And then RPGs, Electric Bastion Land, Maze Rats, and 2400. These 3 really drove the design on all of this. You'll see the world is very Electric Bastion Land. Maze Rats is where I get a lot of the inspiration for the tables. I wanted the the supplement stuff for the GM to essentially be able to use Maze Rats and this side by side and have no overlap in the tables, while still being able to provide plenty of fertile ground for adventuring. And then 2400, there was a post about violence in 2400 that I thought was especially helpful for the frame of how we handle health and taking damage in Adventure Hour. There's an example of play. I'm not going to read through it. I just think it's funny when I was reading back on this that I have Alex, Bo, Chris, and Dallas, which are all gender neutral A, B, C, D characters. Just going through the adventure. I wanted to make the characters go through the adventure that's in the book. So they're doing the belly of the fishy beast, which we'll talk about more in depth later. But every example of play that I use, I want to go back to the same adventure, so that way you could have a sense of where we're going with it and how this ties all together as a thing you can reference. Then there's also a picture of the Squid Man with two little eel characters. Introduction. This is where I give the spiel of what a role-playing game is. I think I literally took the text of Maze Rats and just kind of edited a little more for what this game does specifically. Roles and responsibilities, what it means to be a player, what it means to be a game master, and to begin play. All right, cool. Playing the game. So I did basically all of the rules before I did the actual adventure creation or the character creation, essentially. So playing the game, you have information, impact, and choice. The GM sets the situation and gives the information and asks, what do you do? One or more of the players declare their action, and the GM describes the impact. This is Chris McDowell's ICI doctrine from Electric Bastion Land, all over it. Uncertain actions. If an action described by a player is uncertain, the GM may call for a roll. Before the roll, the GM may declare the possible impact on a successful and unsuccessful roll. One participant then rolls a 1 6-sided die. If the roll is 4 or higher, the adventure succeeds. If not, something bad. Whatever the result, the GM describes the impact and the new situation, continuing play. So, with this, I wanted to make everything 50-50. Basically, you have a 50% chance of success, 50% chance of failure. It's something I describe in probably the most popular post I have, which is Advantage and Impact, which is describing how games like Electric Bastion Land, Into the Odd, and select others essentially give, with slight randomization to adventurer stats, everyone pretty much has a 50% chance of succeeding out of the gate. And the idea was, how do you make that interesting? You could have super quick math, right? But how do you make it interesting in the fiction of play? So that's the next section. Advantage and disadvantage. If you have advantage, the GM may grant one of the following, or any of the following, really. Increased effect. So a character could enjoy additional benefit if they succeed, or it could decrease the risk. So if something bad happens, it's not as bad as it could have been, or just be automatic success, so no roll is required. If they have disadvantage, there could be a decreased effect, as in if they succeed, it's not that great. There's an increased risk. If something bad happens, it's worse than they feared, or automatic failure. So all of this is meant to increase the focus, not on the dice or the mechanics of the game, but on the fictional position. So from the use of an item or a bad position or approach, that's where that starts to affect the outcome, while still very much being 50-50. And I get into it later with some of the other uncertain action resolutions. It does not have to be single D6, was part of the fun of this for me. There are many ways to get at the 50-50 result. I just use the D6, which is kind of a boring die to roll just by itself. But the reason I did that is because then it makes all of the character creation super easy, which all uses a single D6. So rather than conflating one type of resolution with a different type of character creation, I just combine the two. And so now everything is a single D6. But as you'll discover, that's not actually how I play the game. When doing the uncertain actions, I never have done it where I'd use a single D6. That's how I wrote the game. That is not how I played the game. We'll talk more in a minute. Fortune. This is a simple luck roll, 50-50 again, but this is just outside the player's control. So things like weather, passing time, a character's reaction, or the state of their equipment. It's a stroke of bad luck if you don't roll high. GM decides what that means. Inventory. So I wanted an inventory slot system. I don't think I would maybe do this today. I'm not sure. But you can carry 10 items. Makes it pretty simple for inventory management. But like Knave, I would say this game, you are your character class and who you are and the effects that you can have in the game world is largely determined by what you carry. Slightly determined by your background. But mostly it's about the stuff you have. And then fatigue, which is the other side of your inventory. If you exhaust yourself by depriving yourself of food, water, sleep, shelter, or in some cases using spells, that causes fatigue. Magic. I wanted magic to be very external, so things that you carry, a wand, a scroll, something else. Magic is potentially disastrous and may cause fatigue with use. And then I get into some of the combat, right? So right out the gate, adventuring is about dealing damage to foes and survival. So melee attacks. If they succeed on the roll, their opponent is harmed. If something bad happens, the adventurer is harmed. Ranged attacks and ammo. Yep, works very similar to melee, except if something bad happens, they lose 1 ammo. And if you don't have any ammo, you can't make a ranged attack. So I want that to be part and parcel of the game is ammo management. So 3 ammo usually takes up 1 slot. Injury. An adventurer is harmed. They take an injury, write that injury down of what they took, like broken rib or twisted ankle. And when an adventurer with an injury takes another injury, they are taken out of the action. So I wanted there to be essentially 3 states for the adventurer. One is hale and hearty and healthy. So they have taken no damage. And then there's an injured state. And then there's a taken out of the action state. And then protection. So armor, including shield, can prevent injury, but then is damaged and must be prepared or replaced before use. So I wanted there to be single-use items where you could have tankier characters that have, shields, armor, helmets, whatever, that essentially become extra hits that they can take. But again, that's part of your inventory. That's taking up slots. And then if you want to reverse injury, or remove fatigue, you just have to be using a combination of rest, medicine, aid, food, drink, whatever, in order to be okay. Adventuring is dangerous, is a little note. There's a picture here at the bottom I'll point out as being the Ko, the face stealer from Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was the inspiration there. Adventure creation. So we're getting towards the end of the preview before we jump over to the actual document of what, if you were to purchase the game, what it would include. So here you have the 36 character types. And then I put some methods that I wanted to be included because I think some players want a different experience for playing the game. So the method 1 is just random. So you just roll 2d6, you get a d66 result, and you get that character. You start playing right away. The other is to have a choice, so you can select what class you want to be, but not necessarily the exact package. So you say, I want to play a ranger, and then you roll a d6 to see which type of ranger. And then selection. If you are an advanced player who can make a quick decision and don't spend hours agonizing, you can just pick which package you want. I wanted all the methods to be available because I definitely had players on the younger side who said, like, I know I want to play a wizard, or some players who had never played before, and I would just tell them to just roll and kind of discover what their character is. And then others wanted to pick through the list, and I could actually trust them to be quick about it. And so they would say, okay, I'm going to do the Blade Master. That sounds pretty cool. All right, I have the Cleric and the Fighter in the preview, but I'm actually going to jump over to the full game in order to see what's all here for the character contents. All right, 6 classes is what I wanted. Cleric, Fighter, Ranger, Rogue, Wizard, Stranger. I wanted some race as class, but I want it to be very rare. I'm really a big fan of the way Maze Rats did it, where the default assumption, they don't even mention ancestry or race or anything. You're just human. I wanted there to be maybe a little bit of wiggle room. So like 1 in 6 for non-humans, everyone else, human. And so the Stranger class was made so that we could invoke some of those classic fantasy races. But most of our characters are one of those 5 classic classes. I think the one I'm missing is the bard. Really, if I were to reintroduce, or if I wanted to remove the stranger, I think I would put in a bard and then just have different types of entertainers. Thinking out loud for what the future design would be. But I also wanted a little bit of a description of each one, just to kind of ground an understanding of each of the classes. So if you like helping people, be a cleric. Clerics are equipped to support people of all kinds and are by far the best at helping the team and recruiting powerful allies. I'm just going to go over briefly what the methodology was for the weapons and the equipment that each gets. The first item is always a weapon, be it melee or ranged, and then I wanted to have some sort of some key equipment that would supplement that. There is always a consumable as item number 3. And then the 4th is always kind of a grab bag. So let me take my biblical reference, a disciple, as a start. So they have a sling and rocks, which has 3 ammo. And then they have an expandable fishnet. So some key item, usually magical, that has some odd things to it. They have a paralysis wand, which has 3 charges, and then loaves of bread. They have 3 of those as well. So more consumables, I think, than normal for a character. But you can see that, you start with 4 things right out of the gate, and they have, each of them, I wanted them to have many uses, different ways that you could apply them in your adventuring time, and it creates an odd person. What are you supposed to do with an expandable fishnet? What does that do? See, other characters like the friar, I wanted somebody who was a cook from the start, so they have a jar of grease and a jar of honey, which many consumable uses. But then how do you use those things? As a child, you might cartoonishly imply that you could use the jar of honey to make things super sticky, and maybe seal a door shut, but then it could also be super sweet. Again, multiple uses for things. For then each type of class with the 6 subclasses, I thought it was fun to just come up with this list. I think I reused this list a few times of the different items involved. But let me just read through what some of the subclasses were beneath cleric. Disciple, friar, initiate. Initiate has a songbook. Monk, classic with the bow staff. And I thought it was fun to include calming incense among their equipment. Paladin with a horse whistle. The priest, let's see, notable equipment, symbol of light. That was neat for them. Fighter, on the fighter side, we have a barbarian who has a notably a bone collection. Blade Master. This is a direct Warcraft 3 reference, I think. So there's a Bladestorm scroll, which I wanted to be a big kind of ultimate attack that they could use as a spell. Gladiator, who has a trapping net and a trident, very Greek gladiatorial combat kind of character. Knight with a squire attendant. So there are, I think, a few characters that have companions or pets of some sort. Knight is one of them. The mercenary has an oversized key because I make Kingdom Hearts references. Pirate has, oddly enough, an oak barrel. Never specify what's in the barrel. Ranger, Beastmaster, Bounty Hunter, Druid, Survivalist, Trapper, Warden. Druid, for me, the favorite part was the Transform Ring, which I always rule as you can turn into any natural creature. Players always like to have fun with that. I did give the Trapper Fireworks, which I thought was fun. Rogue, so all the different types of trouble causers, sneaky and devious, a great offense against monsters. Saboteur always comes up a lot because they have these itty bitty bombs that they use, and they have a royal crown, which always has the ability to either be traded away as a valuable item, or it becomes a disguise of some sort, which I always find very fun. Speaking of disguises, circus makeup for the acrobat. Trickster has probably one of my favorite inventory sets, which is a slingshot and rocks. They have invisible string of 50 feet, 3 fake jewels, and then a gremlin in a jar. What can you do with a gremlin in a jar? I don't know. Cause chaos, be a distraction. all sorts of stuff. I mean, that's a grenade of fun right there. Wizard. I think I'd mentioned Avatar already, but I wanted there to be elemental mages in here with a little bit of a classic wizard, which is the Arcanist here, who just has his weapon of choice is a big bug net, which I thought was wonderful to use. Is that becomes, I guess, just a giant blunt weapon, as well as you have things like sleep powder in reference to wizards that use sleep, and magic missile wand, and then a teleport scroll is kind of a get in or get out item. I thought it was pretty fun. Illusionist. So they use the mirror image. They have invisibility dust. One of my favorite magic items, which is the switcheroo orb. How does that exactly work? I don't know. A lot of these items are given evocative names, or they're give you kind of an understanding of how they work, but the specifics is largely up to the GM and the player to work out for themselves of how they understand it to be. If the GM says switcheroo, you can't switch the souls of two characters. That doesn't make sense. Or maybe you swap places with somebody else, or maybe you can swap the places of two people or two items, right? There is a lot of gray area if I just give you the name switcheroo orb to use. For the different types of mages, water, earth, fire, air, I think even the order is a is an Avatar reference. I wanted some classic JRPG fantasy. These are the different types of mages right in there to flesh out my 6. Stranger. There are essentially elves, dwarves, and hobbits or halflings, and then I just had 2 variants of each. So sea elf, wood elf, mountain dwarf, moss dwarf, and then hill halfling and city halfling. So giving kind of a duality for each of the classic races. Let's see. Yeah, nothing really to say more on those. They're very fun equipment lists. I recommend reading through them to see what some multi-use tools could look like for a starting set. I think were I to go back, maybe I would include the ability to roll twice more on a large equipment list of all sorts of these kinds of items, so that you're not stuck purely to these 4. Maybe there is like a D666 tool table of small tools, and then maybe a random item or something else, just to give a little bit more than the 4. But pretty solid entries. Preparing the game, I wanted to include some things directly for the game master for organizing the group and reading the environment. Some of these things I've just found are helpful and work when preparing a group. One of the most important being to start a conversation with people you like and to get those people together, hook their interest, start small. Set up a consistent time, consistent place, hold on loosely, be ready to pivot, things like that. Honestly, I was just writing to fill the space of the page, and then just list out the principles and think through what have I not included yet, especially with the different mediums that I was using to play this game. So when I was first, play testing, I hadn't even written the game. With my kids at the YMCA in summer camp, I was running the entire game off of a single sheet of paper and tracking everyone's inventory from there. So a lot of the in-person advice comes from that time of design. And then there's also the other side for as far as setting goes, which is being in video and voice chat when I was teaching on OutSchool and running this for kids a lot. And there are a few things that I had some as big takeaways. Preparing the session is something I also expanded from Maze Rats, and then had a few more notes on things like focusing on the world. So don't worry about the rules. Think about the experience of the adventurers. What do they see? Who do they talk to? What challenges arise? What rewards are found? What are the consequences? To think a lot more about what the players will interact with, what they hear about from you, versus the mechanics of the monsters or exactly how ammunition works, stuff like that. And then for the first adventure, I have the Belly of the Fishy Beast, which I will talk about now. The Belly of the Fishy Beast is a how many room dungeon? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 room dungeon. And you start in one that gives you 4 options pretty much right off the bat. I wanted to have a few things to interact with right away for the start of this game, but I wanted there to be a sense of mystery and wonder to start. So the Fishy Beast start, you follow rumors of treasure in a fishy beast. You found the beast dead in the desert wilderness, and you entered through an opening in its gills. So already a lot of weirdness. I didn't want the game to be coy about how strange it can be. So you start in a room in the belly of the beast, and there are several options given to you. Now, Lico Peo is the one who did the illustrations for this. Just on a whim, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I noticed you did a post on this Belly of the Fishy Beast, a game I was running for. I think I started this with Maze Rats, and it's how I generated this dungeon." And he did this just wonderful illustration of the whole thing. That's floating around on the blog, and on the itch page you can find copies of both on there. So if you want to look at it. List of what they perceive. So I wanted right out of the gate to give the DM something to work with for what they can tell the players. So there's a greenish pool in the room. There's a sound of buzzing from a left tunnel. There's a metal door straight ahead, and the smell of cooking oil from the right tunnel, and a large boulder in the back of the room. So some things you can poke and prod, because then you ask them, what do you do? So given a few options, not too many, but they're also different options. There aren't just 2 doors, and you have to decide between left and right what you want. There are definitely different key sensory piece of information that you have to work with here. So there is there are a few things that you can, again, interact with from the start. But one of my favorite things about this dungeon is that it's very non-linear. So you can do any of these sections right from the start. They don't loop back. You do have to backtrack, but they're pretty self-contained encounters that can be encountered in any order. So if you want to do the buzzing first, that doesn't come at the cost of not being able to do some of these other activities later. As far as the structure, I mean, there are 2 single room passages, and then there are 2 more complex passages. One contains I would say, kind of the quote unquote boss of the dungeon, which is a squid man with mind control powers, and he has 2 electric eels with him. He can be encountered first. You can do the boss from the start, and then only later encounter the quote unquote quest givers. The first time I ran the game, it was actually really fun that happened first. That they beat the boss, so to speak, and then looked around the rest of the dungeon, explored, and took things out. And it was a reminder to me and to them that you can really, take control of the adventure and do it in any order. Now, it does lead to a little bit of an anticlimax when you realize that you did the most difficult thing first, and the rewards and spoils are for you to just go and find and grab now. But it leads itself to multiple playthroughs and a few other very unique experiences there. So the first time I ran this dungeon, again, they beat the Squid Man first, and then went to the Pearly Palace, where there is a King Fishman, and he made an appeal to them to say, "Hey, could you get rid of the Squid Man?" Not realizing that they had already dealt with the danger, and made for an interesting negotiation. I think they bluffed their way and said that they would deal with it, and then they just pretended to go do that before coming back and saying that they had done the deed. So a variety of encounter types here. So there's, I think I'd already mentioned the combat experience with the Squid Man, but then there's also a pit that is too far to jump, explicitly too far to jump, with a pearl on the other side, clam with a pearl inside its mouth on the other side of the pit. So a puzzle. There's also a hazard in a different room. There are leather batwing creatures that are drilling into the teeth and making their homes. So completely optional. Some players will poke and prod these little creatures without realizing how territorial and aggressive they are, but it's completely encountered on their own. There's also a dead fishman behind in a room behind a boulder. that is a bit of a mystery. What went on here? There are some things to poke and prod, but nothing tells you anything. There's no social encounter here. It's Fishman's dead. Versus this other room, which has 2 Fishman guards in it that speak in gurgles and gargles the players can understand. I wanted characters that mime. I always think that's fun, and people, kids especially, think it's quite silly when you go blah, 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 and they cannot talk in any language that they understand. So making that an explicit part of the encounter is always fun. That they have to reach across cultures here, and they're cooking food together. So you could decide to enjoy that with them, or could you maybe somehow poison them quickly? Whatever. It's someone to talk to in this dungeon if you're considering that list of variety that can be contained within a dungeon. These are one of the first encounters you can have, and you could talk with them. Beyond the 2 fishmen is Stomach City. So I wanted there to be a spot in which you can have more social encounters, but then also maybe some urban adventures inside here. So it lists the different places you can go within Stomach City without mapping every detail out. Lists 6 interesting things, and then describes the Pearly Palace off in the distance with the fishman I mentioned earlier, who, let's see, I don't even think I make it explicit that he can speak with the players as the leader. So all in all, this is the kind of the basis of the examples that I use throughout the game, and it kind of illustrates what the game can do. For being the game master, I gave again principles and then expanded on there. All of that information is worth going through. Things like the very Princess Bride principle of skip to the good parts. And some of the OSR things like giving information, treating the world like a real place, treating people as real people, rewarding clever solutions, sticking to results, and showing consequences. Knowledge and perception. This is something I wanted to be very clear in the game. There are no knowledge or perception roles like you might see in other RPGs. If something is hidden, they cannot see it. Have players specify how they search a room and look for what's important. If something is widely unknown, they do not know it. They must find out for themselves by going to a library or asking someone who does know. Players should leverage their smarts, tools, and contacts to help. I wanted there to be a guide for what players can know. So there's a series of questions. That's, is it common knowledge? Then they know it, unless there's a compelling reason why they shouldn't. Is it specialist knowledge? And they know it if their background or experiences cover it. Or is it obscure knowledge? They'll need to find an expert or research in that subject area. So that way you could think through as a GM, if they're asking for something, do I know this? Do I not know this? It helps make a determination of whether or not they could, right? Instead of just arbitrarily deciding, answer the questions and then determine whether or not they know it. I think initially, when I wrote this up the first time, I said, is it obscure knowledge? They can know it if they make a luck roll, I think is what I had. So if you still wanted to do it that way, you could. But I wanted to be, you need to re-engage with the world. Because if you think about what happens when a player asks for more knowledge, what happens in the game world, they just kind of sit there and stare off into the distance. Well, maybe the camera zooms into their ear hole and thinks through, all the different things that they know. Rather, let's just re-engage with the world. Let's find an expert or a resource in that subject area. So not knowing something isn't a block, it's an opportunity for more adventure. Perceiving. What here is easily seen is something to consider. They can see it unless there's a compelling reason why they shouldn't. Again, for both of these base levels of information, the compelling reason why they shouldn't, for me, would be something like, they're blinded, or it's a super dark room. So what here is difficult to see, they can partially see it, give only vague impressions of what they can perceive. And then what here is hidden, they can only see it if they investigate that area, object, or person further. So the questions apply to other sensory information like sound and smell, although sight is the most common. It's something for giving levels of information. The vague impressions piece, I think, is pretty important to me for what makes something difficult. So that way you can see, you didn't get quite a good look. It's hard to tell, right? But you can give a little bit of information that prompts them to look further into something without telling them exactly what everything is. And then the example of play is one continuous example, which I thought was very fun, running through the different types of knowledge and then the different levels of perception as well. Worth a read. I think I did a blog post on this one too. Fighting. So now we get to combat. I just reiterate how harm looks in here. You see, you have healthy, injured, and then taken out of the action. Some enemies are just taken out the first time they're harmed, while others take a few more times to be harmed before they're taken out. Just a reminder that enemies use armor too. All the roles are player facing, which I re-emphasize here. They threaten, like the monsters threaten harm to a player and invites the players to act. So this is a bit of my dungeon world experience where players initiate everything. The GM has a threat that they give with information so that, the ogre is charging towards you, and then puts it in the player's hand for what do you do, because they might run away. They might dive under a table. They might engage the ogre head on. They might, do some crazy move. It gives the players a chance, puts them in the driver's seat, and certainly allows them to come up with something besides just running towards and hitting the monster. And the fights are not always blow by blow. So in keeping with the spirit of skipping to the good part, sometimes you have a combat encounter and you just want to maybe move past it. So you can, if it's not particularly interesting, describe the consequence of the fight and move on. Just because there is adventure somewhere with some mooks to fight, maybe you just describe back and forth with the players how you beat the small mob of whatever characters, and then you want to move on to something else because there's something more interesting around the corner. Leveraging the environment puts the players and yourself back in the world. So no empty rooms. And then I just list a bunch of stuff that could be in the environment. That way you starting to think about the objects in the world and think about the combat as an environment versus a empty room with you and the combatants. Multiple objectives. I think I stole this from Sean McCoy. Things that make tactically interesting fights have more than one goal. Things like the warlock's ritual is almost complete. The water level is rising. We have to get that amulet. They have a hostage. Let's set up that explosive. A third party has arrived. So multiple objectives. It's just, some combat advice. And vary the type of opponents. There are 2 key templates for enemies. Dangerous but dumb, and cunning but weak. This is I'm pretty sure, direct reference to Night at the Opera. So Dwiz had said something like this: to have enemies with obvious shortcomings or limitations, but they're incredibly dangerous. So an ogre who can be easily tricked, or a giant monster who's chained. And then the cunning but weak is a character who has superior preparation and tactics. So this is your Tucker's kobolds. This is your annoying animals that are able to quickly strike, and they're flying, perhaps. So they're very weak, leather batwing creatures, perhaps. But then you compare these 2 types of monsters together for different combinations. Self-preservation. The monsters do think for themselves, and so they will retreat or surrender or risk humiliation before just dying. Smart monsters fight another day. And then you can use maps and miniatures. As a reminder that some kids like the visual aids. Even we used Legos when I was doing this for the YMCA kids. Give an example of combat, which also takes place. Let's see, where does this take place? Oh, in a tunnel beneath Stomach City. The GM may add or remove things as needed. This is also a great spot to connect to a dungeon, like Tomb of the Serpent Kings. Yeah, cool. Dying in deathlessness. This is a topic that came up in my Playing with Youngers posts, in which I was writing about my experiences of running this game for summer day camps. If an adventurer is to die, their player must be properly warned. So having something down to a dice roll and saying, if you fail, your guy will die, and then having them reconsider or renegotiate what they're doing. No cheap shots. Right? There's nothing less interesting than just dying in the game, and then makes you just want to leave. If you do die, come right back into the game. And then on the flip side, so you can have dying, you can also have deathlessness. So I give the example of protagonists in books and films that are in dangerous situations but don't often risk death. So think through some of your favorite adventure stuff where you know they're going to get out of this alive. But what's more interesting to you is what does adventure cost? So there are assets that every adventurer has. Things like weapons, houses, pets, allies, vehicles, reputation, food, money, health, limbs, family, good looks. All these things have value, and so they can be threatened. Anytime something is lost, it's also an opportunity to recover or repair or steal back what's been lost. And then you can also have adventurers retire then. If they don't have death, they may just adventure all the time, or they may go off into the sunset. And it allows players to say when they're done playing the game by letting them go out on their own terms if you do not have death in your game. Uncertain action alternatives. Okay, so I discussed the use of the D6 and how that is the 50-50 method of determining whether or not there is success or failure. In here, I wanted to throw out a bunch of 50-50 alternatives, like rolling a 20-sided die. If you insist on using a D20, you just have to roll higher than a 10 to succeed. So it's 50-50 still. This is the method I use the most often is the ancient style. So you roll 2d6 against each other. Whoever rolls higher succeeds. If adventurers roll higher, they succeed. If the GM rolls higher, something bad happens, and you reroll ties. This is the Dave Arneson Blackmore. It's just roll back and forth. And also, it creates a fun setting of stakes too, because if the GM rolls first, as indicated by the procedure here, GM rolls first, the players can then either be confident that they can succeed because the GM only rolled a 3, or their face can go pale when they realize that there's a good chance they could fail when the GM rolls an 11 or a 12, and then they realize they have to beat that, and oh no. Flipping a coin, heads, succeed, tails, something bad happens. Card style, drawing a card, if a red suit succeed, black suit bad. Timer, so using a timer, using rock, paper, scissors, putting an object in your palm and hiding it behind your back, choosing which palm is kind of like a fun, almost circus game. All of these are methods I've written about before for getting that 50-50 framework. But then I have 2 alternatives that I've done, which is one is the hardcore style, which is you need to roll a 15 or higher, higher than 15 in order to succeed. This game, it makes the game much tougher and is actually closer to the odds of success in the game Maze Rats. And so it encourages you to roll less whenever possible and to leverage the environment in order to get some of those advantages. Clearly describe your actions. This makes the game much more old school. And then age style, which I always thought was fun, is to use a 20-sided die. You need to roll your age or higher. So for players aged 3 to 18, you could have this be one where the younger players are more likely to succeed, and so they have an easier time of rolling, but the older players are challenged more to rely less on the dice and to come up with clever plans that require certainty and instead of rolling for chance. So older players feel great for thinking, younger players feel great for doing, especially if the older players catch on that the younger players are more likely to succeed, and so use them for all of their clever machinations, as is the perfect older-younger sibling dynamic. Problems. These are common issues that I ran into when running for kids. Things like rash actions. So when a player just declares like, I attack the royalty, they don't really know what will happen when they do that. Their prefrontal cortex isn't developed and they're not thinking through the consequences of a declared action. So what to do in that situation? I kind of highlight describing the situation again, cutting to another player to give them a chance to react to what happens, essentially ask, are you sure of the player, and then ultimately just letting it happen. That way you don't have to stall the game for forever. You can learn from the consequences, but don't pull your punches on something like that. Going off-road. So if a player go in a way that you don't expect, you can call for a short break. That's something that I think we don't use enough, because a short break means that the players know that they quote unquote broke the game. You can roll on a table for ideas, and you can end the session. So there are different ways to give yourself time in order to think through where your preparation ends and going off in an unexpected direction. Hurry up. So the players may be taking a long time to plan, and they may be talking about something only loosely associated with the game. So you can always ask, what do you do to focus the game back on the game world and to move things in slow motion? So monsters can make their threat and acts. People that they're talking to clear their throats politely. Time moves on. So things like saying, the sun is getting low, or you start to hear other things in the world that continue to move regardless of you guys talking about playing Minecraft or whatever the case may be. And then you force consequences, right? Adventurers get tired and hungry. You have a random encounter, kick up the tension. Unwanted content, conflicts in scheduling. These are important things to think through. And I wrote about a little bit in there. Building the world. This is where things become very Electric Bastion land. I wanted a central city to be part of this. And so there are a bunch of adventure locations that I wanted to populate the world with, all in reference to a particular city. So it could be any city you really want. It's a central hub that connects all adventurers. So just like Bastion in Electric Bastion land, it's the starting point. It's the anchor for everything else. So you're either inside or outside or underneath or beyond the city. And these are all different places you can go for adventure. Now, instantly we kind of get into gonzo space, sci-fi, science fantasy territory with some of these, like having adventures beyond the city by being on an asteroid or on an observatory or on a skyscraper or space station. But I wanted this to be closer to an experience that could be where adventure could be taken anywhere. And so it does not have to be ye old fantasy. That's one of the freedoms I thought was very fun with Electric Bastion land. I think I just skipped over this, but it gives permission to steal from anywhere. So there are many elements from history, mythology, and fairy tales littered throughout many of these games and stuck permanently to the fans of these games. Vampires, dragons, unicorns, minotaur all have their origin from different stories and have found their way into the fantasy genre. So keep this in mind when preparing. You can steal inspiration from anywhere to steal it, twist it, turn it on its head, and make it yours. So an injunction to take and to just say, if there's a justification that you need for something, just say magic. If things are too crazy, you can dial it back at any point, really, but to just fill the world with what excites everyone at the table. I think I had some post about anachronisms and how fun they are to include in your game. Be it different cultures. You want your Egyptian culture alongside your Greek culture, alongside your fantasy medieval. You can put all these things together and make it work. Just make it awesome, not accurate. And then everything is just a D66 table. Again, sticking to the best die. For each of these spreads, I wanted a little bit of context for how to use them. I think Maze Rats just dumps them on there and expects you to work with them, which, perfectly fine. But because we're dealing with a younger audience and you may have young kids that want to use this, to give a little bit of hand holding for how to use some of these tables. So when rolling a location, for example, you can change the scale. So you can make it bigger than you think. It can contain more threats and treasures that way, and allow for multiple visits and a gradual development. Also think about transportation between these different locations. So if there's an interesting way to get from one place to another, it can be part of the journey and part of the adventure right out of the gate. And then also mixing and matching. So you can roll two different places and combine them to blend the layer and inferred contents with surprising effect. Yep. Having the anchor of the city is very helpful, rather than saying, you start in a village or you start in any of these places without any grounding. Adventure context. So the things that you're doing, there's a treasure involved that you're trying to get, or there's a threat, or there is a timer, something that prevents you from sticking around, forever, or some sort of twist. These I think were largely inspired by the Electric Bastion land, which has key adventure elements that you have to work together. In this, I wanted the alliteration of the T's in order to get all of that together. Adventure site. So if you have a specific place where the adventure is taking place, what are some of the purposes of the rooms, of the site there, some of the rooms involved, some of the features and obstacles. So there is the list of things that make a dungeon interesting. So things to take, things to attack, things that attack intruders, things to experiment with, chances for development, hazards, puzzles, people to talk to, secrets. So when detailing an adventure site, you just keep adding just one more thing until the site reaches completion. And then having layouts with 5 to 9 rooms with clear connections. You can use loops and branching pathways to allow for more interesting choices instead of just a march through a straight dungeon. Adventure development. So this is page 30 here. Different ways that the adventures can change has been important, especially if you don't have levels like this game does. You need to make development to be interesting rather than improvement. So it's not just up and to the right where you're getting more and more power. There is injuries, there are new abilities, there are mutations. There are things that essentially produce more adventure. So you might have a scar, you might have a new power, or something that makes more interesting choices. And then I also talked a little bit about balancing, I would say, developments. So having new powers can be interesting, but if it's now, one adventure has the power of shadow and they're using it for everything and it's becoming a spam, it becomes a tool that no longer makes choices interesting. There are some ways to balance that. So making it exhausting or having limited uses or attached to an item that can be destroyed, lost, stolen, worn down, or its use could attract unwanted attention or requires a cost, like ingredients, food, magical source, help from somebody else, preparation time. I wanted there to be ways that you can give awesome things to players so that they can have the power to bend the elements or to spit poison or have an ooze form as a mutation. All sorts of weird things that you don't see on your standard advancement chart, but make it still interesting by having some ways to limit how much that can do or what it costs. People. So coming up with lists of those that encompass the world. Those are the different roles in society. So having different titles and then instantly moving into what makes them different. So things like quirks, what their desires are, and some of their talents. So that way, if you need to just refer to people by their title or physical appearance, I give some advice for naming. So if they need a name them after somebody you know, and then alter the name slightly by changing one or more letters. This is quite goofy, but I do love it. Rather than providing a big list of semi-real names or semi-fantasy names or stuff that seems vaguely Star Wars-ish in its configuration, you take a name of a friend, family member, or movie character or celebrity and then just warp it. Has always been very funny to me. And I think it works. Even if players can see exactly through what you're saying, it's very funny. It should never be mean, of course, but I think it definitely improves enjoyment when you are all kind of in on a weird, silly joke. Animals. I wanted animals in the game. Kids love animals, pets of any kind, but then they're also, I've listed this out, but they're great sources of characters that you can encounter, but also abilities and items and ingredients and names for all sorts of stuff. So there are animals on the ground, in the water, in the air, which I think are just pretty much from Maze Rats. But then I also wanted there to be animals by your side. So a direct call out for these are the different pets that you could have, or mounts, or monstrosities. Acquisitions, rather than listing the cost of everything, I wanted there to be categories of cost. So common items, specialty items, expensive items, luxury items. So you have different ranges of coin for things to cost rather than having a direct specification. Arrows cost this much. That way you can work in something with a universal currency, but then also you're not too tied down to being exact on everything. But then I also give some bits to complications. So you can buy things for given coinage. You can figure out what the exact price is. within that range of stuff, but no seller should have everything. They might know of a place where it could be found. So rather than showing the players everything that's available and saying, here, you can solve any of your problems by simply buying it, having sellers that inform buyers of different items outside of what they actually wanted. So upselling, giving hot new deals, special offers on weird and interesting items. Stuff like that is I think makes the experience of buying equipment and buying items to be more interesting as an option. You can also limit the stock availability, or maybe there's time required in order to get a specific item, but maybe there's a distinct connection between the buyer and seller. So taking any of those things into account for the actual interaction of buying stuff, I think just makes the whole process more adventurous. And then debt. So this is a very clear rip from Electric Bastion Land, starting the game by being treasure hunting, and saying that you owe the world from the get-go, but you get it's unlike Electric Bastion Land, you get something out of it. I think in Electric Bastion Land, you just are in debt, and that gives you a relationship to somebody in the world, which is fun. But I wanted to consider, what did you actually get into debt for? So did you buy a large Sparkcraft servant, so some like robot, or a psionic puppy? Or did you actually buy a tunnel beneath the city that has your name on it? Or did you pay for a wedding, or a caravan, or a bathhouse, or a nightclub? Or one of my favorite entries, which just says, so many bread. Starting the players off in a ridiculous position in which they have to adventure in order to work off their debt is fun for me. Factions. Factions. So there are large forces outside the control of the players to make for a living world. I think I ripped this from 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. The Nentir Vale and the characters that are in there. I don't even think I hit it very well. But I liked some of the faction names were fun for me for getting a classic fantasy feel, but then these can very easily become science fantasy as well. So that's actually the end of the document. I hope you found something interesting in Adventure Hour and what makes it different, especially for the focus back in on the world. A very FKR game that I wanted to create, a Free Creeks Real Revolution game that says you are a person in the space. There is a monster that you are reacting to. There is treasure to be had, while invoking classic Dungeons and Dragons stuff, but then having a clear design that makes you want to be part of the world and be immersed in what's going on there, and work together as part of it. So I hope you've enjoyed this kind of design walkthrough. Some sections are just me reading what's already there and giving very light commentary, but I had fun doing it, and I hope you enjoyed your time as well. Thank you very much, and have a great day.